Okay, hello, bonjour, welcome. My name's Tamir Maharaj. I'm a trade advisor here at World Trade Center Winnipeg. Thank you for joining today's webinar from assumptions to evidence, why market research is the single greatest way to de-risk business growth. I'd like to begin today's webinar with our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are gathered on the lands of Treaty 1 territory and that Manitoba is located on the traditional and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Anishinaabe, Ininu, Dene and Dakota Oyet nations. We acknowledge that we are also on the homelands of the Red River Métis and that northern Manitoba includes lands that were and are the ancestral lands of the Inuit. The World Trade Center Winnipeg team respects the treaties that were made on these territories and acknowledges the harms and mistakes of the past and present throughout our nation. Before we begin, I want to share a few housekeeping items. Please send all your webinar questions directly in the chat box at the top of the screen, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can during the session, and as well at the end, there'll be a time for a Q&A. For all logistical questions, please also send them directly in the chat box, and I'll answer your question as soon as possible. You'll receive a copy of the slides and recording of this presentation within the next week. Now it's time to start our webinar. I'd like to introduce to you Drew Friesen. Drew Friesen is a fractional CMO focused on providing marketing leadership for businesses in the ag and manufacturing space. With a focus on data and consumer insights, Drew works to build a marketing strategy aligned with your business's goals and then partners with you to execute it, empowering and upskilling your team throughout the process. Drew, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you. You guys can all see my screen. Thank you very much for the intro there. As a quick, how this pertains to today, we're talking about market research. Like Tamir said, I help businesses figure out why more of their market doesn't buy for them, and then we build and execute a clear strategy to improve that. So to do that, we need to understand the market, and that's where market research comes in. I do a lot of it in my day-to-day, and I'm hoping to share some of what I've learned along the way with you and make it hopefully actionable, that today you leave with something you can do to have a clearer picture of your market so you can make some better decisions. Before we jump into market research, realize for a second here that marketing is just much bigger than advertising. I think when people think about marketing, they think about social media, they think about big ad campaigns, but really marketing with a capital M is much larger than that. So you have market orientation, which is where market research squarely sits under, the segmentation of that market, and then your funnel analysis of each segment. We're going to go into a little bit of that today. Strategy, who you're targeting, your positioning towards them, and your objectives for each target. And then the tactics. So this looks a lot like the Kotler 4Ps, if you're familiar with those. You have your pricing and your offer, your distribution channels that you've chosen, your product or solution out there to the world, product innovation. So which features or types of products or other things you can do to continue to refine your product to keep and stay competitive in an individual market, what matters to innovate on and what maybe doesn't matter to the consumer you're trying to reach. And then, and only then, marketing communications, how you go about educating and making those buyers aware of the product or solution that you serve. So today, I'm talking about market research. If this is at all interesting or compelling to you, I've also written an extensive article on segmentation that I'll share with Tamir that he can distribute if people are interested to talk a little about that too. Okay, so a market. Let's define this really quickly. A market is customers bring demand based on their needs, and vendors bring a supply of potential solutions. Together, the two create a market. Marketing, in the wise words of Dale Harrison, is just the power cord that connects the two. The act of understanding the demand and the current supply that's out there is market research, right? To put that in layman's terms, there are buyers with a need in every market, right? Businesses' jobs are to supply a solution. Businesses' jobs are to solve problems. And to understand the supply that's out there already and the demand that they're looking to serve is market research. So a couple of benefits of why on earth you would go about doing this thing. It helps you gauge demand and prevent overproduction. So gauge demand. Is there demand for this solution? Can I be confident that if I develop this product or expand into a new market, that people will want it? It'll be desirable. Or prevent overproduction, where maybe there's not enough demand and you want to be careful how much of a product or a solution you provide there. It helps you differentiate positioning. Positioning is a three-circle Venn diagram of what people want, what alternatives are available to them on the market, and what you are good at serving. Somewhere in the middle of those three circles is your positioning. Without understanding both consumer needs and alternatives in front of them, it's going to be impossible to build your positioning. It also helps you reduce financial exposure and optimize your budgets. If you know where you have opportunity and where maybe there isn't opportunity, you're going to spend your capital wisely. Should you be moving into this region? Should you be spending on these different activities or infrastructure or whatnot? Market research gives you the clarity to do that. And it also kind of helps you with measurement, which it helps you improve your long-term competitiveness. If you can understand the market and the trends within it and the consumers and buyer needs that are evolving constantly in these markets, you can build a plan to continually stay on top and continually have a product that's compelling for your market or the markets that you serve. That increases the impact of promotional spending. If you know, again, what people are looking for and where they are, and the more you understand the market that you're serving, what channels that they're on, where they buy, what they think about, what really matters to them, this vastly improves the success of your promotion. I could tell you right off the bat, I come into a lot of large organizations, and one of the first things I can tell if they haven't done market research is they just talk a lot about themselves. And that's really no slight to them, but it's a very obvious conclusion that you just talk a lot about yourselves if you don't understand the market that you serve. If you don't have really good understanding, if your team doesn't have a good grasp of the market that they're serving and the different buyers within it and what they think about and what they buy and whatnot, you default to talking about yourself. And then, yes, here's the measurement piece. It helps you analyze the impact of past and current activities. And now you may be wondering how on earth market research would allow you to do that. I'm going to give you some examples coming up here. I'm going to tell some stories about how we've done this in real life. So in a summary, again, there's a lot of jargon here, business jargon. I want to make sure that we're talking in a way that everyone can understand, no matter where your background is on this call. Market research helps you to understand unmet needs, and we're using that term a lot today, within key market segments that you're looking to serve, and provides you with an opportunity to meet them, to meet those unmet needs. And that's really how most businesses grow. Right, we talk a lot about, am I saying like the zeitgeist on LinkedIn or where businesses congregate what they talk about. We talk a lot about selling and pushing products into new regions and revenue and all these other pieces that are very internal focused metrics. Market research, a lot of what causes businesses to grow is using things that like market research, they may not use those words to describe at the time, to understand the unmet needs within a market. And if you have a product that meets needs that aren't being met by current solutions, people will choose them. And will over time have you take market share in that category. So what exactly is it? Well, that's the benefits. Definition in a nutshell. What is it? Well, it's a great question. And I'm being a little bit tongue-in-cheek here because it actually is good questions. That's often, regardless of the fancy market research tactic that you go to deploy, and I'll highlight those in a minute here, it's essentially, at its bare minimum, great questions. And I do believe there's such thing as a good and a bad question. Here's some examples of good questions. How big is this market that I'm looking at? Both in how many buyers? Is it 100 million households or is it 20 businesses total? How much money do they spend in a given year? What makes buyers meaningfully different in this category? This is what we classically call segmentation, but you don't segment based off of, Gen Z or millennial. You segment them based off of what makes their buying behavior meaningfully different. So are they really, do they really care about the performance of a runner, like if they're an athlete, or is it more they need to look good if it's a more casual shoe wearing individual, or does it need to be water resistant if it's built for the shoulder seasons? Each buyer has different things they're looking for, and you'd segment them differently. How often do they purchase? This can be a really big unlock for some businesses to understand how often a purchase happens. So an example of this is, how often do people buy a new home, right, and sell their old home. It's going to be a long time between when they purchase a home till they eventually sell that home and move into another one. And that is actually a faster cadence in kind of their young adult life and slows down as they get older. That purchase cycle is completely different than someone who's thinking about the purchase cycles in maybe like a food category, how often they purchase beverages. And knowing the purchase cycle changes how many buyers are going to be in market at any given time, and a lot of the math about how you would build internal goals, and how many buyers there really are for you to serve. What competitors exist? How big are they? Which segments do they serve? All of this will help you understand where there's going to be opportunities for your business. And then within this category, what outcomes matter most to buyers? Which ones don't matter? I'll have some tangible stories about this. I think this one can be a really powerful one for businesses who don't do a lot of market research, don't think about this, their market in this way. Just some simple questions you can ask your current buyers or people maybe who don't choose you can completely change the direction of and the prioritization you do for your business by understanding what outcomes matter to them, which ones don't. And that's because, why these great questions? That's because most businesses start with a product and try to find who's best to sell it to. But great businesses start with the who and try to find how best to make their lives better. Sounds like the same thing in a different order, but it can be fundamentally different in how a business goes in and executes within a market. I'm sure most of you joined businesses that were already existing before they were a part of it. And when you do that and you enter and you get your role, whether it's a senior leadership position or an entry-level position, you are given a product or a solution and you say, go make sure that people buy it. Go make sure that it's distributed effectively. Go make sure. But really, that's kind of a backwards way of thinking. Again, business is about solving problems, and great businesses always bring it back to the who they're looking to serve and what's the best way to provide outsized value for them, right? How to make their lives better. And when you do that, you're just going to make different decisions for your business. So there's two main categories of market research to go about doing this, to see that value and to see those opportunities. So you have primary research. This primary research is when you go out and you find a very specific answer to a question that you have. And there's secondary research. Secondary research is we learn from a common question that's already been asked and publicly available to go find. So both are very valid ways to go get research. It's not like one is necessarily better than the other. But primary research tends to be hyper-specific. You're going to get the answer that you need, but it can be slow and it can be expensive. Secondary research tends to be faster and cheaper. You can get it almost same day, depending on the question you're asking, but it can be limited. And sometimes it can be frustratingly limited. I'm currently working on a project. I can't share too much because of NDAs and stuff, but where their whole category is actually just a tiny little piece of a larger category that we just have almost no access to, right? We can understand how often renos happen in the Canadian market, for instance, but we don't know how many renos include hardwood, or how many renos include flooring, or how many renos include plumbing, right? So secondary research can be really helpful to get you kind of your external box or that fence around your market. And some of the questions that you have may be instantly available for cheap to almost free. But a lot of the questions that you're going to have ultimately are going to be found through primary research. When in doubt, so you're looking at these things, you're thinking about your own business. When in doubt, how do you get started here? I like to, since I've done this enough times, build a lay of the land using secondary research, then understand why your current customers choose you using things like your internal data, qualitative and quantitative research, which we'll talk about here in a second. And then third, listen to buyers that don't choose you through qualitative and quantitative research. When you do it in this order, you tend to not miss much and not have as many gaps. And it tends to be fast to execute quickly. Secondary research, again, like I said, is very accessible and can be found for cheap, and sometimes free, where the rest of this can be slower and hard to get. But you do need all of it eventually. But starting here allows you to build a bit of lay the groundwork, lay the foundation of your understanding in your business and kind of work off of that sequentially. So we're going to do this in order just to make this really tangible and really practical for everybody. And then I'm going to pause and I'll leave room for some questions. I'll tell some stories. And while you're sitting here, if you have a question that you're like, I don't know how mine business would fit in this, or something that I glanced on but I didn't cover fully, feel free to ask it. I think we're going to have some time today to go through that, and I'd love to help. So first off, building that lay of the land. So there's a couple things that you can go do. You're gonna go get like say an industry report or something. It's going to have a lot of different metrics and jargon on there, and you're going to have this whole report to kind of filled with data. What are some important ones you could pull off just that will probably be within here that are going to be useful to you? There's going to be a lot of data there that may not be very useful, though interesting. Here's some ones that are useful. So you're going to get some metric that says your market size or revenue. It could be category, it could be industry. This is essentially how much money is spent yearly in the market. So this matters because this is also hinting at how much product is maybe purchased or how many solutions are purchased in a given year. But that's that one, pretty straightforward. Market size, I split these because sometimes size is the number of buyers or accounts if you're in B2B. So also very, very helpful to know. You can also then try to figure out if it helps for your goals. If you know there's 100,000 buyers, or like I said, in some extreme cases, I'm working with a project where there's maybe 100 applicable buyers, that completely changes the strategy you're going to deploy. Within market size, there's a couple different terms I think are worth understanding. You have TAM, which stands for total addressable market. This would be absolutely everybody you could possibly serve within a category. So if we pick, maybe we would do bicycles, okay? This is not a product I've done before, but as a good example, maybe you sell bicycles. Well, you can probably target most able-bodied people. Maybe you don't do kids' bicycles, you just do for adults across Canada. Maybe that's your limit. So you could look at all the bicycles purchased across Canada. That would be your TAM. Your SAM, which is your serviceable available market, would be what's actually possible for you to service. So maybe we're located here in Winnipeg. You, because of geographical reasons in your own distribution network, you're not able to serve BC or the eastern provinces. Maybe, you can't even get into Ontario. To keep this really simplistic, you can only serve the prairies. So then you'd kind of have this geo-locked area of, I can serve from Alberta to the edge of Manitoba as my SAM, my serviceable available market. And then there's SOM. So this is an even smaller number here. SOM stands for serviceable obtainable market. This is kind of the odd one out, but this one tends to be more like what's realistic for you to obtain. And so this is a little bit more of a goal you would build, but this takes into account the fact that your product is probably not the best possible option in the market. There's a lot of different products that are also good, so you're not going to win all of them. There's going to be the home court advantage where your shops are, you'll probably win more often than where your shops are not, and a bunch of other factors that can play in. Maybe there's a certain pricing tier where your bikes comfortably fit, and you don't fit in the more premium or the more economical biking options. And so there's going to be some people that you're just not going to win. They care about different features, they care about different values than what you're able to supply, and so they're not realistic to win over. This would be your SOM. This would be the kind of the smallest group that you have a realistic chance of winning. So notice how they kind of get smaller and smaller and smaller. And all of these allow you to dial in what's even possible for your business and who to go chase and where they are and all those questions. And this CAGR, I love this metric so much. And I purposely chose 2 examples where this metric did a lot of heavy lifting for us. It is not perfect, and I will share some of the reasons why. But this is one that I almost hear no one ever talk about, at least on the marketing side, and I think it's really, really insightful, and it stands for compound annual growth rate. This is how much the pie is changing year over year. People love to talk about how much market share they have and what, maybe percentage of buyers they win, and they talk about revenue for their business, but all of those are kind of within this microcosm of the pie, right? And the pie would be the entire category, right? Your pie would be the TAM, total addressable market. Well, that pie is also growing and shrinking. Sure, you're winning or losing in the market, and so you're either growing or shrinking as a business, but the pie itself is getting bigger and smaller based on different factors, right? So an example of this is obviously the AI category, right? So for LLMs and whatnot, like ChatGPT, are exploding right now, right? This market size is getting bigger and bigger and bigger every year. But some more mature markets like banking or millwork, like wood services, are barely growing at all. They're growing at like maybe a 1% compound annual growth rate. And so these markets are completely different. And if what your growth looks like in comparison to how much the pie is moving completely changes how you see if you're winning or losing. And I'm going to show you an tangible example of that after this. Then there's obviously your market penetration or your share. This is what percentage of that yearly revenue that you're able to capture. Understanding top or key competitor analysis. It may not be the top dogs in your category. Sometimes it's much more helpful to look at competitors who are more your size or a similar offering. And so I use the word key here instead of top, potentially. There's market or subcategory trends, like what's changing in your market, what are things that are developing in your market. These kinds of reports tend to have this information. Some really helpful things to understand would be macroeconomic trends, right? So if you are in the some residential space where you do a residential good or something related, understanding how many housing starts in Canada each year will be pretty helpful. Understanding mortgage rates will be really helpful. So these are different trends that can really impact how your category is performing. There's the segmentation of these markets. Now, I wouldn't always take what these industry reports say our segmentation, because while they are not wrong, they will create these segments that are quite official and quite rigid. They may not be helpful to you, and it might be helpful to continue to segment further. And one thing I just want to note here is I think what a lot of businesses get wrong about segmentation is you as a team, and this is your marketing team, but probably multiple people who are involved in this, do not create segmentation. They discover it, right? Segments already exist. We're just not listening to the market. People self-organize into categories that, and again, remember, segmentation is based on what makes them buying behavior different, what makes them meaningfully different within this market. And so people already put themselves in categories. They've self-organized as a market into buying differently depending on the values that they have and the outcomes that they're looking to accomplish. And so this market is already segmented. You're just unaware of how it is. And so what I'm saying is sometimes these industry reports have very simplistic segmentation because it doesn't matter for the sake of the report. They just need these larger categories, and you may need to go further than that. Don't get too lazy segmentation. It's a massive deal to get it right. And then segment enrichment. Once you have these segments, you can start to enrich them with data. And I'll give an example of this on the next slide. But an example, a very tangible way of doing that is through creating like content databases. So if you're in B2B and you've created these segments, maybe there's like 3 to 4 segments that really matter in your market. How many businesses are in each category? You could use contact databases to figure out, is it 5 companies or is it thousands of companies, right, in each of these segments? And so enriching them allows you to learn a lot more and understand the market that you're in. An example of one, this one isn't perfect, but it's one that I've done in the past, would be like this. So look at this. This is a category. We're looking specifically at the US birdseed market. This is one I did for a project a little while ago. They have a 2% compound annual growth rate through 2030. So compound annual growth rate is usually written with a time range because this annual growth rate is happening through a predicted period. It's not a real number per se. It's a prediction or it's a projection, but they tend to be pretty reliable. And then the market size here is 2.2 billion in 2024. And the amount of accounts would be 42 million households. So already right there, that's a lot of our lay of the land covered. And then I've segmented it. So I have segments across the x-axis here. You have online and offline shopping as distribution channels. Do not copy the way I segmented this. Everybody has to segment different, but this is one meaningful difference that made a big deal for this retailer. And then we split by the notable channels. So you have Chewy and Amazon, mass retailers, grocery stores, hardware stores, pet stores. And then on the y-axis, we went with purchase frequency. And this is because the frequency of their purchase made a huge difference as to what they looked for. Someone who purchased frequently meant they probably had either a lot of bird feeders or they cared a lot about buying really high quality bags, and high quality premium birdseed comes in smaller bags, hence the higher frequency. And so these are some smart choices that we tried to make sure that we're putting people in the right categories depending on how they buy. We're not going to look at all of these here because this is well beyond what we need to cover today. But if we're just going to take a look at this category here, I just covered the entire thing. Nice job. Let's go a little bit wider than that. Or not. Try again. All right, this category. So we gave it a name. It's avid bird feeders, convenience shoppers. And I just chose that based on the channels that they choose to shop in. Then we took a look at how many accounts are in that bucket. And we said that there was 6.4 million households. It's not going to be an exact number, but it's going to be close enough for the strategic decisions we need to make. There's how much revenue they spend. Again, this is annually. So this bucket spends about 338 million annually. And the last percentage is market share, which I just removed for the sake of this presentation. But you could imagine you would have, a certain percentage of market share with this bucket already. And then at the bottom, I have total revenues here because it was helpful for us. So, but just doing this, which a lot of this is available just through secondary research, a lot of publicly available data. Just look at the difference in the lay of the land that you have, right? You have so much clarity in how these people self-organize, how they go purchase, how we're currently doing with each segment. Instead of we have 15% market share across the category, we're winning with these people, or we're not winning with these people. And you can choose your targets and your goals accordingly, right? Huge unlock to allow you to make better decisions. Okay. I'm going to open for questions here and pause, but I'm just going to explain that some of these things, or a lot of these things I just talked about on this slide, and on this slide, not building this necessarily, but coming up with these industry reports is available through the World Trade Center. So the World Trade Center offers market reports, market analysis, the metrics within them that we just covered, and some competitor intelligence that are found within these reports. They're able to help you with enrichment of these, right? So like the contact database example I gave, they'll have ways to scrape them and pull that from the internet to try to figure out if it's the 5 companies or thousands of companies within each segment. These won't be perfect. I'll tell you right now, that's not to the fault of the World Trade Center. Data is just messy, and a lot of these things are unreliable. You'll need to do what I call triangulation, right? And grabbing a bunch of different sources that are reputable and try to use them to build a knowledgeable database for yourself. And then market audits, which the World Trade Center can help you with to do kind of a more in-depth competitor analysis, evaluation of new markets, and strategic recommendations. So if you've never used the World Trade Center or didn't even know or aware that they offered these things, I'm looking at you, Tamir, start here. I was talking to Tamir before this. We've worked on projects in the past. If you reach out to Tamir and say, hey, I've never done this before, but I'd love to get started, I'm sure he can find you an industry report based on your category that can get you started. And while these reports tend to cost somewhere between $1,500 or more, I've seen them cost up to upwards of $5,000 US. Tamir can probably get it to you for free. So always just start here. Just get your feet wet. Start here. Figure out what industry reports are available to begin building the lay of land for yourself. Okay, I'm going to pause. I got 2 more big steps to take. We're going to talk about primary research and whatnot. But are there any questions up to this point around market research? Any questions based on things that I've brought up? If not, I'm not going to wait too long here and I'll keep going, but I want to leave space here if people have questions that they think would be helpful to answer. I'm also going to drink my coffee. Give it 20 more seconds for the slow typers, and then we're just gonna keep rolling. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. If there's any questions, if you just throw them in the chat, and I'll find good points to stop and answer them as we go. Okay, let me tell you a story to warm up to the next section here. So I was working with a business. This is context here is we were in the midst of COVID. So lots of market volatility and large changes to markets that were seemingly regular. This business had ambitious goals. They had recently spent a lot of their capital on innovating on their product. Their product was, by the metrics they were measuring, either number 2 in the market or maybe number 1 in some of the things. So this product innovation brought them to be a very competitive brand in the category. And yet, sales volume was down year over year. Revenue was down 5%, maybe more. It was hard to tell. And, we can talk about some of these if necessary. And then with these changes, with volume being down and revenue being down and some lack of confidence from their dealers that they were selling their products through, they're beginning to lose confidence also in their product and their team. Their big question to me was, why are we underperforming, right? Why does my team or my product or my dealers suddenly suck? They didn't say it that way, but that's what they're asking, right? Did my team suddenly change? And the answer, of course, was no. But we asked some questions. Secondary research, one of the first things we looked at, just to grab, was the compound annual growth rate had slowed in the near term. There was a predicted rebound coming, but the category, the pie, remember that we're talking about, was not growing, right? It was very, very stagnated at the time, with growth coming in the near future in the next 5 years, but it was very stagnant. Category revenue for the year was down 15%. And search volume, which is one way of a proxy metric for buying intent, you can find this across Google or whatnot, was down 20%. So like there was 20% less volume of people searching for solutions in this category. Also, through secondary research, not in an industry report, but other methods, we saw that competitors were also struggling to sell through some social listening and whatnot. I'll explain more of that in a second, but turns out lots of people were struggling in their category, and there weren't that many competitors. And so we were able actually to take a look at a magnifying glass at most of the big ones, and that most people were struggling. Through the lens of market share, this particular company was up 10%. So you say, how can that be possible? Well, if the revenue was down 10%, so the entire category, it was down 15%, and we're only down 5% revenue, well, it's not that simple, but the basic math here is we're kind of up 10%, right? So they weren't understanding that the actual pie this year had shrunk. It shrunk dramatically. But they were actually just continuing to grow within it. So when we analyzed, competitor sales and their own revenue, this business's revenue, they were actually up. They had gained market share. Just the category was stumbling. And through secondary research and a couple other methods, we were able to see that this was a volatile period, that growth was probably coming. We never have a full crystal ball, but COVID was a pretty strange time for most markets, and there was a light at the end of the tunnel. And actually, their product innovations they had made a big difference, and people were choosing them more often, and they had gained market share. And the thing about market share is it's pretty stable. And so if you've gained market share in the slow, when the category goes back to expanding and you have a higher compound annual growth rate, you tend to keep that market share. And so they were up 10%, and actually they turned out they were going to be very confident about the next period because they'd gained market share in the slow, and that was going to be realized again, and are also found when the category started to grow again. So it was actually, their team was great. Their product was great. It was a hard year, and looking at their lay of the land, looking at secondary research allowed them to understand that a little bit better and to not give up on some of the things they were doing. I think one of the risks that happens for businesses like this is they start to just shoot themselves in the foot a little bit. They lay off staff, they cut budgets, they slim down, they make concessions on their product, right? But what was happening here was actually above and beyond what they could control. There was larger macroeconomic things at play. That once they're aware of it, gave them the confidence to continue trudging forward. I've also seen the opposite happen. I think through COVID, a lot of businesses learned the wrong lessons. They succeeded despite their efforts, not because of them. And they learned some wrong lessons where they were maybe doing things that they thought were causing them to grow. But actually, the category was just swelling in size, and there's a lot of new demand coming in, and they were growing kind of despite of the things, their efforts, right? And then afterwards, they were doing a lot of useless things that didn't really matter to the consumers they're trying to serve. So, secondary research, big deal, can tell you a lot. Research and analysis allowed us to understand the health of their business relative to the market conditions, allowed us to project future demand in the category. Demand was coming again. There was a destabilization that had happened in the short term, but demand was very likely to come back. Allowed us to manage finances and set up proper budgets, what to do in the downturn, how to spend properly when the category resumes its growth, where to spend and where not to cut and where to cut, and to measure the impact of our current and past actions. You can use a lot of your own market share growth and by percentage to understand whether the things you're doing that year made an impact or not, right? It's not easy to do, but when you're looking at your status relative to the market that you're in, you can have a better understanding of what's making a difference and maybe what's a waste of your time. Okay, So that's lay of the land. Now let's talk a little bit about your current customers. Qualitative and quantitative research are some of the best ways to do that. And so we're jumping out of secondary research and we're talking about primary research. Now, primary research comes in two larger forms. That's the qualitative research I was talking about. So examples of this would be customer interviews, customer panels or focus groups, ethnography, and social listening. Ethnography is just a fancy term for kind of ghost shopping or watching your consumers in action. I think a great way to do this in B2B, if you have like a large product and you're in, let's say, manufacturing, an area I spend a lot of time in, going and visiting people who use your product or competitors and just watching them in action can be the most insightful thing you're going to do. And so if you have a consumer good, standing on at the aisle and watching people choose a product, or doing your little road trip and seeing people in action using the product, whether it's yours or competitors, will be some of the most insightful things you'll learn, because those kinds of things just don't show up in secondary research. Those kinds of things don't show up probably in interviews either, or customer panels. Seeing a product or a solution in action in the real world will just give you unique insights that you'll never get somewhere else. So I love ethnography. And social listening is like online or in coffee shop or in whatever. Online's the easiest way to do it. Coffee shops are not as scalable, but trying to figure out how people are talking about this product in this category. There's lots of tools out there, just a Google search away. I'm not going to bring any up. There's not any I'm like particularly fond of or whatever, but there are certain ones, or there's lots of products, in this category where you can just scrape Reddit and social media platforms to get an understanding of how people are thinking about the category or particular businesses. That'll be less useful to you for smaller businesses, because you'll just have a very much softer or quieter signal. You probably won't get a lot of talk about your product at scale, but you'll get an understanding of your competitors that way. So it's still useful. And there's quantitative research. Quantitative research is more absolute, I'm going to say. That's not necessarily a positive or negative term. People tend to love quantitative research because you get strong numbers and this percentage of people said this and this said this. But just because you get strong numbers doesn't mean it's more true than qualitative. They just tend to answer different questions. So examples of quantitative would be things like surveys, a classic. Conjoint, which is a fancy term for kind of building a bunch of different permutations of choices. This does not matter for this group necessarily, but very quickly, conjoint is you could set up 4 anonymous products with varying variables. So let's say this one is really fast, this one is high quality, this one has a certain price, this one is expensive and cheap, and you set up all these variables and you randomize them across, and consumers continually pick these anonymous products, and you try to figure out which variables are most important to them. Very cool. That's what conjoint is. Experimentation, which is a kind of an odd one out here, where it's just you do something in the market, you measure it appropriately, and you try to figure out if it's something that mattered or didn't matter to someone's buying behavior. And then share of search, another quantitative way. You can use free software like Google Trends or some of the paid softwares out there. I like Telescope as another one, where you can kind of get what are people searching in volume across different search engines, and get a sense of buyer trends and their thought processes and how they buy, and etc. You'd even get how much your product gets searched versus a competitor's or the category search terms. So can be interesting. When in doubt, I know this is kind of subverting what I said in the original sequence here, I would do qualitative first to learn the variables and then do quant. So if we're looking at this list and we're saying we need to do some primary research, there's just things we don't know, and if we did know them, we'd make more confident decisions as a business. What to do first or where to start is I would always do qualitative first and then do quantitative to understand the weight of them. And here's why. I'm going to give an example. An example is why it's not actually pricing. Now, I cannot count the amount of times that I have met with businesses and they would either understand my stance or through working with me understand my point of view. And they say, Drew, I know you say pricing is not the end all be all, but you're wrong here, or you don't understand this particular buying group, or you don't understand my market. And that's what they tell me. And I understand why this can come up a lot, or this confusion exists. People talk a lot about pricing. If you ask someone what's going to matter in a market or in a particular decision they're going to make, They're going to bring up pricing. Pricing is the elephant in the room. Everyone talks about pricing and buying something. And there's a good reason for it. It's not because it's the most important variable, but it's actually the summary of the variables. Pricing is an equation. Pricing is all of these variables, the things that matter to them, put together into an absolute term, which, I mean, if we're splitting hairs here, there's other things that can matter that are much more important than pricing. But pricing is a contextual value. It's not its own value to its own necessarily. And I can prove that to you right now. No buyer goes to the market and says, I have $15. I want to spend $15. I just can't find something that costs me $15, right? That's nonsense. Nobody buys that way, right? Nobody's buying exclusively because of the price something is. People buy because of an outcome. They have an outcome they want to accomplish, and they're looking for something that can provide that value. Once they do, they try to find the best price for those set of values, right? They want to spend what it's worth, right? So, and I'll give you a really grounded example of where that works, maybe in a place you wouldn't think so. I was meeting with a client this last week, and they were saying how, Drew, it's different here. We're commodity adjacent. It's not a commodity, but it's adjacent to it. And this buyer, all they talk to us about is price. And it doesn't really matter what we do. They just want to bring down the price. And I said, we can jump into this, and we should. My intuition, even before we get started, is one of two things is happening. Number one, they don't understand the value you're providing. And if you were able to explain it and articulate it in a different way and reframe, they'll see the value and be willing to pay the price for your solution. Probably not, but this is the one that strokes the ego the most of businesses, right? Because they believe in the value of their product. But number two is probably what's happening, is you're not listening. You're not listening because this buyer particularly has a set of things they're trying to accomplish, a set of outcomes, a set of needs. And what they're saying by that price is too high is you've way exceeded these values, and you're giving them more than they're asking for, right? If we put it on a chart, they said they want a 5 out of 10 quality of material, and you're giving them a 10 out of 10, right? They wanted it to be this durable, and you're giving them double the durability or whatever. That's great and all, but if you can't meet them where at a tolerable price point, then all those extras they have in those values doesn't matter. You're over-engineering a solution for a need they have, right? They're not looking for that. They need a good enough solution, right? A lot of that in residential is, everyone's moving to these like faux wood in laminate or MDF particle to make things look like it's solid wood, but it's not actually. They are not looking for the perfect wood solution and the cost it does to deliver that, looking for a good enough solution based on the values they have. It's not because they're cheapskates. It's because you're not understanding the values they have, and you need to meet them based on their needs. And so you either make a more economical product or you go serve somebody else. They're not looking for your product. And so it's a listing problem. And it tends to be 90 times out of 100 a listing problem. You're not understanding the needs they actually have. And there's maybe a different buyer that has those needs, but these ones don't have that one. Okay. Another story. Let's talk about entering a new market. I think this one's really relevant to World Trade Center and the topics that are talked about here within the World Trade Center discussions. So another business here, their current market had stagnated. This is one from this year. There was a new opportunity in a new market. So there's a new geo they could enter. Now, this does not necessarily mean you have to jump into another country. Sometimes that can be another province. Sometimes that can be within the same province or country that you're in, and it's just a different market within it. In this case, it was a new geography. They were looking to move into South Africa. And they wanted confidence in a strong entrance into this new geo. They were worried that this stagnation, this slowing of sales that were happening locally would follow them to this new geo, or worse, put them in a precarious situation where they're spending all this time and money and bandwidth on this new geo, and they maybe lose sight of their current geo. So these are the concerns that they had, but they had no experience selling there. They didn't understand the customers. They didn't understand the dealerships there. They didn't understand the competitors. And so they asked me, what they brought to me was a question: how do we mitigate our chances of failure? How do we make it so it's likely for us to succeed in this new endeavor? There's always a risk, but how do we mitigate our chances of failure? So, like always, we asked some questions. Secondary research showed that this new geo, South Africa, was growing. This category was compounding. It had a strong growth rate. 10% compound annual growth rate is extremely high because it's compounding, much like your investments in the stock market. A 10% growth rate is actually something like a doubling in 5 years because the compound is always based on the net new pie. 10% growth rate is almost essentially doubled in 5 years. So extremely high growth rate. The size was bigger than expected. There was actually more revenue spent year over year, but there's also more buyers in this geo than they thought there would be. So that allowed them to understand the projections a little better. Competitors were also mostly local and mature businesses. And so there was maybe room for a new challenger to enter this market. There wasn't a lot of challengers all fighting over the scraps. These were mature businesses that had been there for a long time. And there was room for opportunity. This was validated, this thesis for us, by using primary research. We talked to key buying groups, and the key buying groups were frustrated with the current solutions. They had specific frustrations that they had that our capabilities could meet. Some of their voiced what we call unmet needs were some things that this business could do, and they had the capabilities to accomplish for them. And they also articulated that if these things could be met, that these key buying groups were going to be less price sensitive, right? They weren't locked into necessarily the pricing that was the pricing hold that was happening in their current geo. That jumping this new geo, which require some overseas shipping and logistics nightmares, so that would add to the cost of their COGS, that they would be rewarded, and that these key buying groups were going to be willing to pay the difference in order to get some of these unmet needs met, right? And so this gave us a lot of confidence that it's very possible to move into this new geo, and they were likely to succeed with the right plan. So it allowed us to understand if their product had product market fit in the new geo, right? I think this is something that's really important. Now, interestingly, they actually didn't have product market fit in this geo, but we knew exactly what they would need to do. And so they had this whole new product innovation plan that was based on how they were going to serve this geo really well. Something their current equipment wasn't going to be able to do, but with some alterations in some focused areas, they would be able to meet without large costs. Allowed them to build projections for near-term revenue and profitability. We had buying groups that said, hey, if you could come in at this price point with these features, this would be something very interesting to us. So we could build projections based off of how many buyers there were, how fast the category was growing, and how likely which kind of buyers would choose us. Again, think back to that segmentation map that I showed you. Not every buyer will be interested in these values, but some of them will. And so you can make projections based off of those estimates. It allowed them to set priorities for product innovation, just like I said, right, where their product actually wasn't going to work there. The roads in South Africa are much smaller. Building plots were much smaller. Fields were much smaller. So innovation had to take place, but they knew exactly what to do instead of floundering and working on innovation that didn't matter. And it created a tactical agenda for them to improve customer value, improve and distribution, and improve their mental availability, which is another way of saying, customer awareness of their product/solution. Okay. One other thing I want to note here is I've also seen this go wrong. And again, if you have any questions or specific examples you'd like, throw them in the chat. But one other story here is I've seen situations where product innovation goes the wrong way without market research. I had a business come to me and said, we were about to spend $2.5 million on a R&D to improve our product in ways of efficiency. And I said, that's great, but what do your consumers care about that? Does that matter to them? Do you think that's going to improve sales? And they obviously thought so, but they brought me on anyway. And so we went and did some research. And long story short, looking at the time here, but it's an interesting story, consumers weren't going to care at all. That efficiency, while it matters, was actually already met. This is not an unmet need for them, that products were already efficient enough, and anything more that they were going to improve on efficiency was going to be over-engineering. They weren't going to pay for it, right? It wasn't going to be important for them in their buying decision. Instead, they asked for a product that was closer and customer support that was closer to them. And so I came back to that team and said, listen, you can spend the $2.5 million on making your product more efficient, but realize that may have no impact on buying decisions. That those funds that you have, that capital you have, would actually be better spent on making sure you have a higher dealer density, that you have better customer support, that people can have better access to post-sale support. And so, yeah, it made a huge difference in the direction that business went. And without research, they would have spent a lot of money in the wrong direction and then been confused why purchasing wouldn't have improved. But anyway, looking at the time, I don't think I want to cover jobs to be done. I want to respect people's time here. So I just want to summarize here. Why on earth do we do this? And then I'm going to leave some room for question. When business decisions feel risky, market research is your lighthouse. It's how you navigate foggy market conditions. It's how you figure out what you do in these large decisions you're making for your business. And that's just because if you understand your consumer, you're in the best position to make the right decisions. When you lose sight of your market and what they want and what they're thinking about and their needs and what they're frustrated with, you're just going to you're much more likely to make the wrong decisions, to invest in features or metrics that don't matter, to say things that are irrelevant, and to be in places where consumers don't care about your values or what you can offer. So it makes a very big difference to have a good ear to the ground and to understand the market that you're trying to serve. Okay, this is what I have to bring today. Is there any questions that came from this topic that you want me to hash out while we're here? Otherwise, Tamir, I think you got some questions from before people had asked, so we can throw those in the chat. But I'll prioritize live in the room if people have them.
We can start with the questions that I got. So we got, when first addressing any marketing gaps that we notice in our companies, what's those first steps once we notice these gaps to address that or fill these gaps?
Yeah, I think I think one of the first steps any business that is maybe a mature business, it's been around for a while, it has a buying or customer base, is to talk to your current customers. And you go reach out to them, and some of the most important questions you could ask, I would go, I'm not talking about scalable like you send them an email. I'm saying maybe you email them to set up a call and you jump on a video call or you go see them in person. Like, do unscalable things and meet with these people. Some of the most important questions you can ask would be, what caused you to go buy in this category? What matters to you in your buying decision? Where did you do your research? What products did you or solutions did you weigh between? Why did you ultimately choose the one that you did choose? Were you happy with your decision? What do you regret? What was it like after you purchased it, right? What would you do differently next time? These are the kinds of questions that you're going to get answers to that will completely change the way you think about how people buy in your market. And if you get enough of those conversations, you'll build a pretty good understanding of why people are continuing to choose you within your customer base. And the next step is to go do it with people who don't choose you and learn about why those are different, right? And I think if you meet with enough buyers who don't choose your product, you'll just learn a lot about what you could be doing differently to improve your likelihood of success in that market. Whether there's a product change or a distribution change or a communication change, some of the tactics actually become quite obvious once you spend enough time with buyers. Otherwise, another thing I would note is there's just a lot of variables that matter to someone when they purchase. I'm not going to go into the full thing, but for instance, if you were building a morning smoothie for somebody, right? Yeah, it sounds weird, but a morning smoothie was your product and you're trying to make the best product possible. There's a lot of sub jobs within that job that people are trying to accomplish. And the more you can understand what matters most to that person making that decision in the morning, the better you can make your solution, right? So it's not just have the best tasting smoothie on the market. In this hypothetical, if you went and talked to them, maybe a couple of things came up. It needs to be super available where they look for food. Maybe it needs to be in convenient locations. Maybe you have like a fast food like joint where it's available on the major streets where they commute to work. It needs to be maybe safe to consume while driving. If it's a breakfast food and it's a handheld drink, how do I make sure it's really easy to hold while I commute to work, right? This is a hypothetical, depending on the questions you get. It needs to taste great, obviously. It needs to be nutritious, maybe, or nutritious enough that I can validate it as a likely choice in the morning versus something else. It needs to be convenient to dispose after I'm done with it, and it needs to stave off hunger until lunch break. bit of a silly example, but notice how there's so many little sub jobs, even with something as simple as a smoothie, that if you understand that, and you understand where these sit about how important this is to their buying decision and how ultimately they choose which direction they go, you can focus on or figure out what to focus on first in terms of improving your product in the market.
I have another question is when customers are deciding to buy, have you noticed any variables that matter the most? I know it's not price, but is it like trust, urgency, convenience, reputation, or
I Unfortunately, I have to give the frustrating consultant answer of it depends, but I would say there are some common ones that are at the top, and risk mitigation is very common. I think it's the most common B2B when you're buying on behalf of a company instead of your own personal interests. A lot of what makes a decision is am I going to get fired for it, right? Like your name was in the line for that decision, and so maybe it's not that extreme that you're going to get fired for the wrong choice, but it's risk mitigation, right? Like how easy is it going to be to set up? How soon till I see that realized outcome? If it goes wrong, how badly can it go wrong? And those kinds of things can be really impactful for B2B decisions. B2C, it can vary wildly depending on what we're talking about, from consumer goods to large purchases. So it really can depend. But people typically have a couple set outcomes, and it's their likelihood to achieve that outcome, how hard they'll need to work to accomplish that outcome, their effort and sacrifice, and ultimately those things culminate in a price tag. So yeah, it depends. I think talking to your consumers is a really big unlock to understand which of those matter in your category.
I do have a question. For doing secondary research, how long or how much time should be spent on doing that, knowing that there's lots of information out there?
That's actually a really good question. I have maybe a funny answer for it, but the answer is typically good enough. You need to get spend a good enough amount of time doing it, right? Like strategy, or especially the market research part of strategy, can be an infinite game. There's always more to read and consume and to learn. You can continually meet with a group of people. There's a couple stop gaps of when you're doing quantitative. There's like a certain amount of people you can reach to hit like a statistically significant sample size. So you're at like 90% confidence or 98% confidence rate. But for a lot of things, it's going to come down to at what point do we feel confident? And if you're working with someone who's maybe experienced in it or an expert in market research, there'll be certain methods that you only need X amount. But the larger answer is when you feel confident. When you feel confident, then you're probably good. And it's not something that's done once. I guess the only thing I'm going to say is you feel confident now, and then you need to set up. Market research is not a once and done. It's not like when you're a startup you do it and then you just turn it off for the rest of your business's life cycle. It's something you come back to continually, and so it becomes a cadence, right? Are we confident now to make this decision, and how do we set up regular behavior and a culture of learning and insight with my team, that my marketing department's job and maybe some other functions business, their job is to continue to have a good ear on the ground through these methods, that maybe we revisit this every 6 months or yearly so that we continue to have a good handle on the buyers we're ultimately trying to serve.
Thank you.
But yeah, it's good enough. Do the good enough amount of research so you can move forward. And you learn a lot from doing. I think if you set up a decent amount of research and then you execute on that thesis, because it's kind of what we're doing, right? We build this thesis about what we believe is true about a group of consumers, and then we go do something. Your job is to fail fast or to double down once you've learned something is true. And so you can use that as another gauge on whether your insight was good or not.
Perfect. I think we're right at time here. If there's any other questions, feel free to send them through email or reach out to Drew. I've just put our upcoming webinars and events, also a link to our calendar as well. Thank you, Drew, for the wonderful presentation. Thanks for everyone who joined, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.